Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. This is a great episode because every time you hear about political violence, you turn on the TV and the media is parroting the same line. Studies show it's mostly right-wing, that right-wing violence, all-time high. They're the ones responsible for the political violence. Even when an act is committed by rabid leftists, they try and pull the both sides BS and go on and on about right-wing this, right-wing that. But what does right-wing even mean? Are they talking about Republicans? Are they talking about conservatives? Or are they just using lazy academic labels meant to smear one side of the aisle? And that's the problem right here. Labels have become weapons, and words have been stripped of their meaning. Once you control the words, you control the debate. And the media, the Democrats, they have been very effective at using labels to bludgeon political opponents. Now, some have woken up, but we hear it constantly. It hasn't ended. Even with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, you would think they would stop, but they don't. Racist, Nazi, misogynist, homophobe, transphobe, fascist. We hear these words constantly flowing out of the mouths of the talking heads, the political class. And, just last weekend, you had a deranged, evil man attacking a Mormon church in Michigan. Several people were murdered. This was an evil person. Immediately, Democrats and their allies tried to label this as right-wing violence. They said the man that perpetrated the attack was a Trump supporter. Now, I have no idea about the political leanings of the man, but Republicans and conservatives have a general mutual respect for the different sects within Christianity. And while this man had a hatred for Mormons, I don't see how this attack is connected to political violence and right-wing violence. It doesn't make any sense to me. And not for nothing. More importantly, even if he was a Trump supporter, so what? What does that have to do with anything? He was evil and should be universally condemned, which he has been. It's not a Republican or Democrat thing. You don't hear Republicans or conservatives making excuses for this guy's actions. You don't see Republicans or conservatives celebrating death. You don't hear Republicans saying, well, what he did was bad, but like we hear progressives doing when it comes to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I don't even need to take it to that extreme when talking about labels. Just last week, President Trump was trolling House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and people need to get a sense of humor out there. He put out an AI video of Hakeem Jeffries in a sombrero with Mexican music, a mariachi band in the background, over the shutdown where Republicans are accusing Democrats of shutting down the government because Republicans won't fund health care for illegals. Now, then Minority Leader Jeffries comes out like a tough guy, accused the president of putting out a racist video and told the president that he has something to say. Say it to my face. Say it to my face. So what did President Trump do? Well, he trolled him again, only this time it was even funnier because Trump was the mariachi band. Was this juvenile on the part of President Trump? Yes. Was it funny as hell? Absolutely. It's okay to have a sense of humor, and Trump is certainly funnier than Kimmel, Colbert, and Fallon all combined. But the point of this episode today, it's to set the record straight about left-wing, right-wing violence, what's perceived as right-wing. So I'm getting sick and tired of it. The terms left and right, it started in the French Revolution. If you sat on the left side of the National Assembly, you supported radical change. If you sat on the right, you supported the monarchy and tradition. Now, you fast forward to today, and we've turned a simplistic seating chart, we'll say, into a moral scorecard. And, of course, the left equals morality, empathy, compassion, inclusivity, tolerance, unless you disagree with them, and righteousness. The right, they say, equals racism, hate, oppression, bigotry, and ethnocentrism. The left equals enlightenment. The right equals backwards. That's how academia, the media, and the political establishment have conditioned us to hear these labels. But that's not objective. That's a narrative. That's not fact. It's not truth. It's a narrative, and it's a lazy one at that. It's meant to reduce the entire spectrum of political thought into a simplistic dichotomy to frame one side as inherently virtuous and the other side as inherently dangerous and hateful. Nowhere is this more obvious than in how they've treated the word nationalism, especially when it comes to the United States, because we are the most unique country on the planet. And you have political scientists and other progressive academics, the talking heads out there. They've tried to frame nationalism as an evil concept. They've attached race, ethnicity, religion, and they do it to demonize anyone that supports the nation-state concept, because that's nationalism. Nationalism, properly understood, is based on the nation-state concept. It fosters loyalty within a society, especially here in the United States, where what links us together? We don't have 2,000 to 3,000 years of a shared history. We don't have one shared culture. We don't have shared traditions. The only thing that links us together here in America is the acceptance of the American creed. It's about sovereignty. It's about a shared civic identity, loyalty to the Constitution, love of country. This is what's supposed to unite citizens regardless of their race, ethnicity, or religion. We are united under one banner, the banner of the American political philosophy that's supposed to be steeped in the belief of natural rights, liberty, and freedom. But they tried to destroy the idea of nationalism. They hate the word. They hate what it stands for. And progressive academics, the pundits out there, they've tried to rebrand nationalism into something dirty. They throw around terms like white nationalism, Christian nationalism, ethno-nationalism, as if those are natural extensions of the word. They're not. They'll even say, well, it may not be nationalism in the traditional sense, but it's ethno-nationalism. That's the biggest crock of shit. Words have meaning. If you're elevating race or ethnicity above the nation state, you're not practicing nationalism at all. You're practicing ethnocentrism, the belief that your culture and ethnicity is superior to others, and therefore you are free license to target, discriminate, and oppress anyone, those that you believe are inferior. And you do this through the power of the state, the government. That's why we have the word ethnocentrism in the first place. If nationalism meant the same thing, we wouldn't need two words. But see what happens here? By deliberately blurring nationalism with racism, Nazism, fascism, or any other ism that you could think of, they smear anyone who disagrees with them. They can delegitimize any conservative or Republican, any traditional American who believes in the idea of America. They want to smear them as inherently oppressive and dangerous, meaning anyone who loves their country, anyone who believes in putting America first. Well, you're in league with white supremacists. And this kind of language, this kind of rhetoric, it's dishonest, it's manipulative, it's done on purpose, and it's gone on for far too long. And more importantly, here's why it matters. When the elites, the academics, Democrats, and journalists talk about right-wing extremism, they lump everyone together. Republicans, conservatives, white supremacists, militias, you name it. And by using these sloppy categories, they collapse ordinary political identities like Republican and conservative into extremist caricatures. You see it. You see it how they explain and describe Charlie Kirk. Now, the average Republican or conservative who believes in limited government, lower taxes, capitalism, protecting the Constitution, they're getting painted with this brush, the same brush as they paint the fringe neo-Nazis who want a totalitarian state to enforce a racial hierarchy. That's insane. They're not even close. Let's be honest, though. This isn't accidental by the left. It's a deliberate tactic, because if you could redefine nationalism as racism, if you could redefine conservatism as extremism, then you don't have to debate policies. You don't have to debate ideas. You just brand your opponents as Nazis and evil people because you want to silence them. And if you think about it, it's kind of worked. Do you hear Republicans or conservatives making a full-throated defense of nationalism, of American ideals? Do you hear them go out and explain what Republicanism and what conservatism really mean, and how groups like neo-Nazis are anathema to Republican and conservative ideas and values? The idea of nationalism, love of country, loyalty to the republic, defending sovereignty, it's not racist. It's patriotic. It fosters patriotism throughout our society. It's actually healthy because it's the glue that binds all these different peoples from all these different places, e pluribus unum, under one constitution. It motivates us to help our fellow Americans, whether it's during a natural disaster or tough times. And it doesn't matter about race, color, ethnicity, gender, or any other identifying factor for that matter. We have a shared civic bond in this country, a shared destiny. Meanwhile, when you look at white nationalism, it's not nationalism at all. That's ethnocentrism. It's built on the totalitarian state, and it runs directly against the principles of Republicans and conservatives. Yet, because we've allowed academics to redefine these words, most Americans have no idea the difference. They hear nationalism, they think racism. They hear right-wing, they think Nazis. This is how we've allowed the debate to be corrupted in America. And let's be honest, classical liberals, they have far more in common with conservatives than they do with modern-day progressives. But I want to explore this idea of white supremacy and Nazism because Democrats haven't stopped using the word Nazi. You would think they would have stopped after Charlie Kirk, but no. And I want to explore further because when you begin to peel back the onion, you will see that white supremacy is built on the collectivist mindset. Collectivists, keep that word in mind. Statists that are far closer to Marxism than to anything that represents conservatism or republicanism. And I want to explore that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. It's no secret that as we age, our bodies begin to break down. Now, if you want to move with ease and keep your skin glowing and youthful, you got to try Native Path Collagen. It's made with only type 1 and 3 collagen. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of your body's collagen, and they're found in your skin, bones, joints, and gut. They deliver powerful benefits without any fillers or additives. I have it every morning with my coffee, and it's a single ingredient, flavorless powder that mixes easily into the coffee. But you could also put it in smoothies, oatmeal. It's third-party tested for purity, and it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide form. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, and 8,000 five-star reviews, Native Path is a brand you could trust, backed by a 365-day no-risk guarantee, live phone support where you talk to a real person. They make it easy to get started. So check out the bundle deals and join their private Facebook group for recipes and support. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So I brought up the sloppy labels that the ideologues in academia, the media, the government, what they do to use and smear and delegitimize entire groups of people. Now, I want to get into the heart of it. I want to take a look at why associating white supremacy and Nazis with the so-called right is completely wrong, because we have to examine what Nazism really is. And Nazism isn't conservative. It's not Republican. It's not even to the right of them. And if it's not to the right of them, well, then where should it be placed on the political spectrum? The answer is simple. Nazism and white supremacy is married to statism. Statism is the political system where the government is the highest authority within the state, and they are granted supreme authority over the lives of its citizens and all economic and social activity. This is critical to understand. It's critical because the vast majority of white supremacist groups, both in the past and now, want the exact opposite of what conservatives and Republicans stand for. They don't want limited government. They don't want individual liberty. They want a massive government machine that can impose a racial hierarchy by force. Nazism was white supremacy weaponized into a political system. The Nazis believe the state should not serve all citizens equally, but should serve one race, one people above all others. And the way they enforced it was through total government control and sheer brutality. Control over education, control over the press, the economy, control over the police and military. And if you got out of line, if you dared to challenge the authority, you would be swatted down. Does that sound familiar? Because that's not conservatism. That's not republicanism. That's totalitarianism. That's tyranny. That's collectivism. And the kicker is, when you look at all the modern white supremacist groups in America, which I will tell you right now, they are limited. They are few and far between. Are there white supremacists in the United States? Yes. Are there white supremacist organizations in the United States? Yes. But I want you to think back. Early 1900s, we were a country of 125 million people, and there was over 20 million members of the Ku Klux Klan who held high-level positions in government, in politics, in law, in business, in the law enforcement, police officers. Today, we're a country of 350 million people, and the average estimate, not by Professor Giordano, I am going to use the Southern Poverty Law Center, who certainly tries to frame every conservative as a raging lunatic. But according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the estimates of those in white supremacist organizations is between 4,000 and 6,000 people, maybe up to 10,000. That's it, at a country of 350 million people. So yes, do white supremacists exist? Uh-huh. Do some of these groups exist? Yes. But the groups in America, they may be fragmented. They're certainly pathetic. What do? What do they all have in common? They all have in common the statist instinct. They want to create a giant government apparatus that enforces their racial vision. They don't believe in freedom for everyone. They believe in state control to advance their own group. And I want to put the myth to bed. White supremacy has nothing to do with Republicans or conservatives. Conservatism seeks to restrain government, not empower it. See, white supremacy wants to expand it. They want to centralize it. They want to turn it into a weapon. And just look at their rhetoric. White supremacists talk about racial laws, racial hierarchies. You can't do that without a massive government bureaucracy. They talk about censorship of opponents. Republicans and conservatives should be championing free speech. Most of them do. Again, they want to wield the state as a bludgeon. They fantasize about a society where government forces people into racial categories and policies, and the government itself will determine who gets what rights and who doesn't. That's not liberty. That's not small government. That's not republicanism. It's tyranny. It's big government authoritarianism dressed up with some racial clothing. Conservatives and Republicans believe in the three principles of old republicanism, that the government is naturally flawed because it's created by human beings, and we're flawed, and any flaws that we have, we automatically transfer into government, that liberty is best protected in the small state, and that the government that governs the best governs the least, because most of us believe that constant lawmaking is a direct threat to liberty. Let's be honest, every law that's created, every law, it's designed to control human behavior in some way. Now, I understand laws are necessary. You need laws for societal order. But you don't want a Congress that just churns out law after law after law. That chips away at our liberties. That's why we believe a restrained government is the most important. And when we talk about political violence, because this is where the distortion really matters, if you separate out white supremacy, the Democrats and academics have nothing. See, there's a reason they try and lump white supremacy into quote-unquote right-wing violence, and it's to inflate the numbers, because then they could pretend that Republicans and conservatives are responsible for it, that Republicans and conservatives are out of control. So what happens if we're honest? What happens if we carve out white supremacy, we carve it out, make it its own category, separate from what they label as the right? What happens then? Well, the left loses their favorite talking points. They lose their moral high ground, because the fact is the vast majority of political violence is not carried out by Republicans or conservatives. And once you separate that out, the narrative that right-wing violence far exceeds left-wing violence collapses. You're left with white supremacist violence on one side, which everyone universally rejects, and anarchist, Marxist, left-wing violence on the other side. Suddenly, the left doesn't look so pure anymore, right? Their virtue signaling begins to crumble. They're not the moral holy warriors they pretend to be. And here's another truth the media won't admit. Republicans and conservatives consistently condemn white supremacy. They reject it outright. They don't try and excuse it. They don't want to make excuses for it. They don't glorify it. They don't make martyrs out of white supremacist killers. Now, contrast that with how left-wing violence is treated. Remember the 2020 riots, cities burned, police stations torched, small businesses destroyed, dozens of people killed in the chaos? What did Democrats and progressive activists do? Well, they excused it. They said it was the language of the unheard. They called it fiery but peaceful. They dropped charges on people. You had Democrat politicians going all the way up to Kamala Harris trying to bail people out. They made excuses for violence because it served their political narrative. Look at the reaction to the attempted assassinations of President Trump. Many of them expressed their disappointment that the shooter missed. You look at the Luigi Mangione and his assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. And what happened? He now has a fan base. Look at the reaction to Charlie Kirk, the celebrations, the glee. Now, I'm not saying this is all Democrats. Many Democrats did come out and condemn the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I want to make that crystal clear. But even some of the ones that condemned his assassination, they attempted to add qualifiers afterwards. They would say, well, he didn't deserve to die, but. No, there's no but. You can't include but. He didn't deserve to die, period. That's it. End of story. That right there demonstrates the difference. Any normal Republican or conservative condemns hate and violence, regardless of what side it's coming from. Many on the left excuse violence when it's on their own side, when it's their own side doing it. However, on the right, we have seen Republicans and conservatives routinely come out and condemn any violence that happens. So when you separate white supremacy and Nazism into their own bucket, where they belong, three things begin to happen. You expose white supremacy for what it really is. It's a statist authoritarian movement, not based on conservatism. You shatter the stupid, lazy academic talking point that right-wing violence dominates. Okay, that label only works when you lump Nazis in with Republicans. But you also reveal the left's hypocrisy because conservatives condemn violence while left-wing activists, politicians, they excuse it. They even normalize it when it comes from their own camp. They still will tell you that Antifa is simply an idea. They will say it's not a movement, it's not an organization, even though there's a clear structure, it may be decentralized. But these decentralized cells do have structures. There is funding going to these organizations, and yet Democrats will try and make an excuse for it. That's the reality. I understand. Listen, Nazis and white supremacists are universally despised by conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, progressives. Any normal person would despise them. They're horrible human beings. However, there is a radicalism that is going mainstream. And I think that we need to pay attention to that radicalism. So I'm going to tackle that after we get back from a quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, if you haven't done so and you're enjoying the content of this episode, if you find it informative, please give the P.A.S. Report podcast a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a good review on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And make sure that you send this episode to people you know, because we need to set the record straight. We need to put an end to the smears against Republicans and conservatives. As I said at the end of the last segment, Nazism is despised by both mainstream conservatives, mainstream Republicans, mainstream Democrats, any normal person. Nobody in our political mainstream is secretly waving SWAT stickers. Nobody's building a fourth Reich in the GOP or the Democratic Party. Now, if we understand that, and if that's true, why does the Nazi label keep getting weaponized in our political debates? And the answer is simple. It's because you have the political operatives finding it useful. If you can call your opponent a Nazi, you don't have to debate them. You don't have to defend your own policies. You just slap a label on the political opponents and you begin to move on. And then you could propose the most radical things because nobody's paying attention. Here's the problem, though. By collapsing conservatism and republicanism together with white supremacy, the left gets to inflate the political violence numbers, the political violence statistics. They smear their opponents, and they try to claim the moral high ground. Meanwhile, the truth is that Republicans and conservatives reject white supremacy outright. They don't excuse it. They don't make martyrs out of these people. They certainly don't want a massive government apparatus, especially building a racial hierarchy. That's not who we are. It's not what the Republican tradition is about, but the smear works. And that's why you hear so many Democrats throwing around the term Nazi whenever they're backed into a corner. It's not about accuracy. It's about power. That's what it always comes down to. And the irony is that while Democrats are busy accusing everyone else of being Nazis, they've opened the door to real radicalism inside their own ranks, inside their own party. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying Democrats are Nazis. Again, mainstream Democrats despise Nazism. But you can't ignore the reality that socialism and Marxist-style thinking have gone mainstream in the Democrat Party. And I want you to think about it. You've got elected officials who proudly call themselves democratic socialists. You've got the whole DEI bureaucracy, the CRT-based curricula forcing schools and workplaces to brainwash students. You've got policy platforms that expand government control in every aspect of our lives, whether it's healthcare and education, whether it's energy and determining what stove we could buy, how many children we could raise. It's crazy. You've got an entire political movement that increasingly defines people not as citizens of a shared nation state, but as members of racial or gender identity groups. They despise the idea of legal immigration and citizenship. And this is exactly the opposite of nationalism. For God's sakes, you got a person leading the New York City mayoral race who's campaigning on government rent control, government-run grocery stores, free transportation. You see Democrats trying to put forward legislation to put an end to single-family housing, as they tried to do here in New York. The idea of bail reform, closing prisons. These ideas used to be fringe, far to the left. Not anymore. Not anymore. These aren't fringe ideas anymore in the Democratic Party, this new Democratic Party. These are not just campus radicals in coffee shops talking theory while wearing their Che Guevara t-shirts. These ideas are actually being legislated, funded, and institutionalized within the system. You have modern and blue dog Democrats essentially being shut out of their own party, their voices being silenced within the party. The attacks on people like Senator John Fetterman. You now see attacks, Senator Angus King. He is an independent, but he caucuses with Democrats. But you see the attacks on him because he dared to cross an aisle and vote with Republicans on a CR bill. You have the AOCs of the world threatening party members with primaries if they dare to push back against the progressive takeover of the party. Now compare that to conservatism. When you look at Republicans and conservatism, they don't all agree on the issues. There's a lot of infighting. In fact, Republicans will stab each other in the back much faster than Democrats stab each other in the back, that's for sure. But when we look at the principles, limited government, individual liberty, nationalism, loyalty to the Constitution, sovereignty to the state, sovereignty to the American people, they may not follow through on these ideals. I may despise Republicans and conservatives for that. I despise them for not defending these principles more. But that's a different topic for a different day. But when you look at these principles, does that look like Nazism to you? Does that look like white supremacy? Because let's look at Nazism and white supremacy. They're the complete opposite of those values. They're collectivists, and everything in the communist system is for the collective. The ideas espoused by white supremacy groups, it's hostile to liberty. We want to restrain government power. White supremacy worships government power like Marxists do. And that's where the hypocrisy comes in, because the left spends all their time screaming, Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. They want to scream this at Republicans, while their own party is normalizing socialism. Their own party is normalizing Marxism. Their own party is normalizing government power. You tell me which is a bigger threat to American liberty right now. This political sleight of hand, instead of debating their own radicalism, their own policies, they scream Nazi. And it's amazing because when you talk about them and their policies and you say that they're socialist or Marxist policies, they'll be like, see, you're doing the same thing. We call you Nazis, but you call us Marxists. No, Marxism is a political theory. That's Marxism. It's actual policies that are being pushed. You have admitted Marxists in your political party. Some of them are pretty strong Marxists. And unfortunately, we have a biased media that, they'll amplify the Nazi rhetoric, yet you don't see them challenging Mamdani one bit. They understand that once the label sticks, you don't have to answer questions about how socialism has gone mainstream. You don't have to answer questions about how communism failed every single place it's been tried. You don't have to answer questions about how communism leads to misery and suffering. Instead, they're just going to say, well, they're better than the Nazis. It is a smart strategy they use, but it's a dishonest one. Very dishonest. And it's finally, I think, caught up where it's failing. But we have to define ourselves. We can't let our political opponents define us. We have to define ourselves. The reality is that Democrats for far too long have been able to label their political opposition and frame themselves as the good guys, the ones that are really fighting for the little people. And we need to call it as it is. They care about power. That's what they care about. When we look at conservatives and Republicans, they want to limit government power. And we need to put pressure on Congress, particularly the Republicans, to do just that, because power is a corrupting force. And obviously, when President Trump came into office, when the Republicans took the House, You got the Republican Senate, but we're still 7 votes shy of a filibuster-proof Senate. The reality is that we should have already seen bills introduced that would begin to cut the size and scope of the federal government. So I am disappointed in Republicans and conservatives. I am disappointed that we haven't seen reforms through the legislative body to make sure that the government can never be weaponized against certain groups of people again. But when we look at the framing and the labels that go on, right-wing, left-wing, Republicans, conservatives, Democrats, progressives, Nazis, white supremacists. White supremacy and Nazi should be in its own category, its own evil category. It shouldn't be lumped in with Democrats or Republicans. But when we're talking about radicalism, we see radicalism in America today. It's not Nazism. I'm not worried about Nazis. It's the mainstreaming of socialism and Marxist thought into the Democrat Party. That's the debate we should be having, not a fake, lazy, cartoon version of politics where every Republican is a fascist, but a real honest debate about capitalism versus socialism and Marxism, the benefits of capitalism, why capitalism is extremely important, how we don't live in a capitalist society. I'm so sick of capitalism getting blamed for everything when we have a shared economy. We have some capitalist principles in our economy, but it's heavily regulated. We need to have the conversation about liberty versus collectivism, individual responsibility, self-reliance versus dependency, freedom versus government control, nationalism versus identity politics. That's the choice that we're facing as Americans. These are the debates that we should be having, not the distractions. Now, I hope you found the content of this episode informative. If you did, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a good review. And don't forget to share this episode with your family and friends. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.